Hello and welcome to the UPSC Mains PYQ series, the live mains PYQ series. In this series, we will be discussing all the GS mains questions asked by UPSC over the past years in the mains examination. Now, in this session, we will be discussing about the 2024 General Studies Paper 1, question number 11 to question number 15. Okay, let's start. Starting with the first question. Though the great Cholas are no more, yet their name is still remembered with great pride because of their highest achievements in the domain of art and architecture. Comment. It is a 15-mark question that we have to answer in 250 words. Now, please note that this question is asking about the Cholas. Okay. And we are given an introductory statement and we have to comment on that statement. Now, mapping it with the syllabus, we can see that it has been asked from the subject Indian heritage and culture, and the topic is salient aspects of art forms, literature, and architecture from ancient to modern times. Okay, so we have to discuss art forms as well as architecture in this particular question. Now, the approach that we'll be taking in answering such a question is that in introduction, we describe the Cholas, we describe the reign of the Cholas, their timestamp and their significance. Also, we write a line, a connecting line that will connect the introduction with the body. Then in the body, we write about the architectural achievements, the artistic achievements, and the overall legacy of the Cholas. Because the question is asking us to, the demand of the question is that we have to comment on the architectural achievements as well as the artistic achievement. Then in conclusion, we will be summarizing this entire answer. Now, the introduction. The Chola dynasty flourishing between 9th and 13th century CE in the southern India is remembered not only for its political and military achievements, but above all for its monumental contributions to art and literature. Now, this is our introductory line. So, we were given an introductory line in the question, and we had dealt with that introductory line in the introduction itself, introduction of the answer. Now, this is the introductory line. When writing about the connecting line, their name endures with pride because they elevated the Dravidian art forms to their peak, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire and define the Indian cultural identity. This is the connecting line. Now, we discuss the architectural achievements in the body. First is the grand temples. The Cholas pioneered the large-scale temple construction with the Brihadeshwara temple at Tanjavur standing as a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a symbol of their architectural genius. Okay, so we have given the example of Brihadeshwara temple in Tanjavur. Its towering Vimana, massive Gopuram, and intricate sculptures showcase advanced engineering and artistic vision. Okay, so we have given example. We have discussed about grand temples, the grand temples built by the Cholas, with the prominent example of the Brihadeshwara temple. Then, what innovations were there in their architecture and in their architectural achievements? So, Chola temples introduced features like the expansive courtyard, the mandapas, and richly decorated gateways. And they set a new standard for the South Indian temple architecture. So, what were the things? What were the new things that they introduced? What were the innovations that they made? First is the expansive courtyards. Second is the mandapas or the halls. And third is the richly, highly decorated gateways. Then the urban and cultural centers. The temples were not just places of worship. So during the reign of the Cholas, the temples were not the only, they were not limited as the places of worship, but also they were the hubs for the education, art, and community life and fostering the overall cultural development. Then talking about their artistic achievements, first is the bronze sculptures. The Cholas perfected the lost wax technique. So this is the keyword. This has to be there in the answer, producing exquisite bronze idols such as the iconic Nataraja. Give the example of the Nataraja sculpture, which epitomizes the fusion of spirituality and artistry. These bronzes were celebrated worldwide for their lifelike expressions and the dynamic forms. So, first is the bronze sculptures, lost wax technique, and the Nataraja temple, the Nataraja idol. Then the paintings. The Chola wall paintings, especially in the Rajarajeshwara temple. Okay, give the example of the Rajarajeshwara temple. Depict the mythological scenes with vivid colors and forceful composition. This is the characteristics. The vivid colors were the characteristics and the forceful composition, adding to the another dimension to their artistic legacy. Then is the cultural patronage. The Chola dynasty institutionalized the support for artists and craftsmen, ensuring the continuity and evolution of their artistic traditions. Then, what is the enduring legacy of the Cholas? The legacy of the Cholas. First is the global influence. Chola art and architecture influenced the regions beyond India, notably in the Southeast Asia, because the Cholas had a greater influence in the Southeast Asia. Okay, the Southeast Asian states were like the vassal states of the Chola dynasty. Okay, and they were thorough trade and cultural exchange with the region of Southeast Asia. Then the modern relevance. Their masterpieces continue to inspire the architects, artists, and scholars, and their temple remains active center of worship and heritage tourism and sustain the local economies. So even though these temples are hundreds of years old, but still they are the active centers of worship and the heritage or cultural tourism. Then in conclusion, we summarize the entire answer. So though the Cholas are long gone, their unparalleled achievements in the art and architecture have immortalized their name. Now, please note that we have taken this phrase from the line of the question itself, okay, so that we can make a connection between the question as well as our conclusion. Their temples and sculptures stand as enduring symbols of India's cultural grandeur, fostering pride and continuity in the Indian heritage. The Chola legacy is not just a chapter in history, but a living testament to the heights of creativity and vision that the Indian civilization can achieve. So, by writing these good things about the legacy of the Cholas, we conclude the answer. Then, moving on to the next question, that is question number 12. How far is it correct to say that the First World War was fought essentially for the preservation of balance of, okay, a 15-mark question that has to be answered in 250 words. Now, mapping it with the syllabus, we can see that it has been asked from the subject of world history and the topic is world wars. And more precisely, it is asking about World War One. So we have to give reasons that the First World War was fought in order to preserve the balance of power, especially in the European continent. Okay. Then the approach that we'll be taking in introduction, we describe the First World War, the time period, and then connect it with the body, with the connecting line. Then we write about the balance of power as the central factor and the other significant causes because we have to explain the causes in the body. Okay. So body, please note that always address the demand of the question in the body of the answer. Then in conclusion, we summarize the answer. Now, introduction. The First World War from 1914 to 1918 was a devastating conflict that reshaped the global order. Okay, that's just a brief description of what the First World War was. While preservation of the balance of power in Europe is often cited as the central cause, the war's origin are rooted in the complex interplay of multiple factors. So this is our connecting line. And in the connecting line, we have mentioned that even though the balance of power in Europe is the central idea or is the central cause, but there were many other complex factors who were at interplay as the cause of this war. Now, first, the balance of power as the central factor. The alliance systems. There was the formation of triple alliance between Germany, Austria-Hungary Empire and the Italy, and the triple entente between Britain, France, and Russia. So they were alliance systems or the formation of alliances. And it was primarily aimed at maintaining a balance of power, preventing any single nation from dominating Europe. So all these alliances, they were formed in order to prevent any one nation to become very much powerful or so that it can tilt the balance of power. Okay. Then the German ascendancy. Germany's rapid industrial and military growth threatened the existing equilibrium. Okay, so in the later half of the 19th century and the initial years of the 20th century, Germany saw a very rapid growth, both in terms of industry as well as economy. This prompted the Britain and France to counterbalance through the formation of alliances and military buildup. So as a result of Germany's rise, Britain and France, they felt threatened and they tried to counterbalance it by forming alliances among each other with each other and along with Russia, and they also back up their military. Then is the naval arms race. The intense naval competition between Britain and Germany exemplified the strategic efforts to maintain the power parity. And this naval arms race were especially seen in the continent of Africa. Then there were regional rivalries. So there were tensions in the Balkans, that is Eastern Europe, especially between the Austria-Hungary and Russia, which further destabilized the balance in the region and drew alliances into conflict. So the alliance systems, the rise of Germany, the naval arms race, and the regional rivalries and the conflicts, all these were the ultimate causes that tilted the balance of power. So all this say that the balance of power was the central factor. Then other significant causes were the rise of nationalism. Rising nationalist sentiments fueled territorial disputes and antagonisms, especially in the Eastern Europe and the Balkans. In the Eastern Europe and the Balkans, there was a rise of nationalism, the hyper-nationalism that was fueled by the territorial disputes. Okay, so this is a very common thing that if there is a rapid rise, a hyper rise in the nationalism, if there is hyper-nationalism, then always that country will be having territorial disputes with the neighboring countries. Then there was imperialism. Competition for the colonies heightened the rivalries as seen in the crisis like Morocco, straining the relations between the European powers. Especially in the African colonies, there were intense competition. There was intense rivalry between these European powers. Then was militarism and domestic pressures. See, the glorification of the military power and internal political pressures made the war seem inevitable. Fourth was the immediate trigger. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914 acted as the spark in an already volatile environment. Okay, so this was the trigger. The assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand was the immediate trigger or the spark which led to this fire of World War I. Then, in conclusion, we write while the preservation of balance of power was a significant and recurring theme in the pre-war diplomacy and strategy, but the balance of power itself alone was not enough to explain the outbreak of the First World War. The rigid alliance systems, fueled by the mutual suspicion, turned local disputes into the global conflict. So, firstly, there were local disputes, then it became the European disputes, and then with US joining the World War, it became the global conflict. Okay, nationalism, imperialism, and militarism were equally potent forces that contribute to the escalation. So, apart from the balance of power, the three isms, that is, nationalism, imperialism, and militarism, were equally potent forces or were equal potent factors that led to the escalation of the World War I. Moving on to the next question, that is question number 13. Okay. How far was the Industrial Revolution in England responsible for the decline of handicraft and cottage industries in India? Okay, a 15-mark question that we have to answer in 250 words. Okay. Now, this is a question in like mapping it with the syllabus, we can see that it has been asked from the topic of from the subject of world history and the Indian history as well. Okay, modern Indian history. So it is like an overlapping part of the syllabus, the impact or the relationship between the world history and its impact on the events of the world history. So it is talking about industrial revolution. So what major impact industrial revolution had on modern Indian history? Now the approach that we'll be taking, so in introduction, we will be describing the industrial revolution because the question is revolving around the industrial revolution. Then we will be connecting it with the body. Then in the body, we address the demand of the question by writing the impact of industrial revolution on Indian handicrafts and cottage industries and the overall impact of British policies. Then in conclusion, we summarize the answer with a forward-looking conclusion. Okay. Now, talking about the introduction, the Industrial Revolution, which began in England. So, Industrial Revolution began in England in the late 18th century. It fundamentally transformed the global manufacturing and trade. Its effects extended far beyond Europe, deeply impacting colonial economies like India, where traditional handicrafts and cottage industries had long thrived as a vital source of employment, culture, and export revenue. So, in the first line, the first introductory line, we have described the Industrial Revolution. In the second line, we have connected it with the body. Then in the body, we address the demand of question by talking about the impact of Industrial Revolution on Indian handicraft and cottage industries. First is the technological disruption and mass production. The introduction of advanced machinery. As a result of the Industrial Revolution, there was introduction of advanced machinery such as the spinning jenny and power loom established the British factories, enabled the British factories to produce textiles and other goods at an unprecedented speed and low cost. So this heavy machinery like the spinning jenny and the power loom, it enabled the British factories to mass produce the textiles at unprecedented speed and at a very cost effective way. Indian handmade goods, especially the textiles in like the Dhaka muslin, could not compete with the volume or price of British made machine made imports, leading to a sharp decline in demand and widespread unemployment among artisans. So, our Indian handmade, Indian goods, Indian textiles were mainly handmade and they could not compete with the volume as well as the price of the British machine made imports. Then the colonial trade policies and market manipulation. The British imposed high tariff on Indian exports to England, okay, while allowing the duty-free entry of the British goods into India, creating an uneven playing field. So the trade policies of British were highly tilted in favor of their home country. Okay, so they impose heavy tariffs, they impose heavy duties on the imports that were come or the exports, the products that India was exporting to the UK or the Britain, and on the other hand, on the products that were exported by Britain and were imported in India, there was zero duty. So there was a grave imbalance. Then the Charter Act of 1813 and other colonial policies dismantled India's export markets and forced the artisans to sell their products at low prices. Okay, so the Charter Act and the other British legislations and other British policies, it kind of forced the artisans to sell their products at very low prices. The East India Company established the monopolies over raw materials and handicraft products, dictating prices and exploiting the local craftsmen. Then there was the economic and social consequences. India was reduced to a supplier of raw materials. Okay, first, before the Industrial Revolution, we were exporting the products. We were exporting our end products. But after these policies of the British, we were reduced to mere a supplier of raw materials and consumer of the British manufactured goods. So we were sending the raw materials and we were also consuming their finished or manufactured goods. And this resulted in the deindustrialization and economic drain. So these two are the keywords that should be there in your answer when you are writing such uh, the trade policies of the British or the financial policies of the British. The collapse of traditional industries led to massive unemployment, poverty, and erosion of the artisanal skills as well as the cultural heritage. The loss of royal patronage and inadequate support for technological adaptation further weakened the cottage sector. Then, what were the impact of these British policies? So, while the Industrial Revolution was the major factor, but the decline was not inevitable. Okay, along with the introduction, there were the policies of the British. So, Industrial Revolution, along with the British policies, that led to the overall decline. So, deliberate colonial policies prioritized the British economic interest over the development of Indian industries. Okay, some sectors like the embroidery and weaving in certain regions survived, but on a much reduced scale. The introduction of railways and the Western education did open new opportunities, but these primarily benefited British capitalists or led to the export of raw materials rather than the growth of indigenous industries. So it is widely believed that the British introduced the railway in order to just export or in order to transport the raw materials very efficiently over long period of time, over long periods, over long distance in short period of time. Then, in conclusion, we write the Industrial revolution in England was largely responsible for decline of handicrafts and cottage industry in India through technological superiority, mass production, and exploitative colonial practices or policies. So there were three factors, that is technological superiority that they got because of the industrial revolution, and with this technological superiority, it led to the mass production and the overall exploitative colonial policies. The dismantling of India's traditional industries was not just a byproduct of industrial progress, but was accelerated by deliberate economic strategies that favored the British interest. Reviving the traditional craft today requires integrating modern technology and ensuring the fair market access to artisans. Now, this last line, is the way forward line or the forward looking line in which we are providing hope or we are ending the answer on a positive note. Moving on to the next question, that is question number 14. The groundwater potential of the Gangetic Valley is in serious decline. Now, this is the introductory statement. How may it affect the food security in India? And a 15-mark question that we have to answer in 250 words. Now, mapping it with the syllabus, we can see that it has been asked from the subject of geography, that is distribution of key natural resources across the world, including the South Asia and Indian subcontinent. So it is talking about distribution of water as a resource, the groundwater resource in the Gangetic Valley, that is in the Indian subcontinent. Now, in introduction, we describe the significance of the Gangetic Valley and write a connecting line connecting the introduction and the body. Then in body, we address the demand of question by writing the causes of groundwater decline and its effect on the food security, because the question is asking about the mainly the question is asking about effect on the food security. Now, please note that it is a 15-mark question, and in the question, it is asking explicitly about the effect on food security. Okay, the reduced groundwater potential in the Gangetic Valley and its effect on the food security. But because it is a 15-mark question, then there is an implicit question as well. We have to also discuss this decline in the groundwater potential of the Gangetic Valley. Okay, so we have to discuss the causes of the groundwater decline. Then we write the effect on food security. Then we conclude the answer by summarizing it and writing a forward-looking line or a way forward. Introduction. The Gangetic Valley, spanning states like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Punjab, and Haryana, is the agricultural heartland of India. So we have described that Gangetic Valley, the significance of Gangetic Valley, that it is the agricultural heartland of India, producing a significant share of the nation's rice and wheat. However, the region faces a serious decline in the groundwater potential due to over-extraction. Now, this will be our connecting line. So, we are talking about the serious decline in the groundwater potential due to over-extraction, inefficient irrigation, climate change, which pose a grave threat to India's food security. Then, writing about the causes of groundwater decline. Over-extraction for agriculture. Over 85% of groundwater in the Gangetic Valley is used for irrigation, especially in the water-intensive crops like paddy and wheat. Okay. Second is the inefficient irrigation practices. Okay. So these 2 points are linked to each other. Flood irrigation method that we predominantly use in India and lack of micro irrigation systems like the sprinkler system and the drip irrigation system lead to a significant water wastage. Okay, so 90% of the water is wasted when the farmers undergo this flood irrigation, or the farmers they use this flood irrigation method. Then is the climate change. The erratic monsoons and rising temperatures reduce the natural recharge rates and exacerbating the water scarcity. Now, due to this greenhouse gas effect or the global warming, there has been a change in the climate which lead to erratic rainfall, prolonged period of high rainfall, prolonged period of drought, and situations are like that. Sometimes there are floods, sometimes there are droughts. So there are erratic monsoons. Finally, is the urbanization and pollution. There is increased urban demand and contamination from the industrial and agricultural runoff. So the industries as well as the agricultural runoff. So in agriculture, we are using there's a heavy use of fertilizers, pesticides. All of them are the water based. So they dissolve in water and they leach into the groundwater and thus polluting and contaminating it. Similarly, the industrial effluents, they are also discarded on the, if they are discarded on, if they are discarded on the ground, they contaminate the groundwater. If the industrial waste is disposed of in the rivers directly, then it pollutes the river water and the adjoining groundwater. Then the effect on the food security. Now, what is the effect of this reduced or this causes of groundwater decline? Groundwater decline, what is its impact on the food security? First is the reduced agriculture productivity. The Gangetic Basin produces 50% of India's rice and 85% of its wheat. A declining groundwater directly reduces the yields of these staple crops, threatening the national food security, food supply. So in India, the rice as well as the wheat, they are the two staple food grain crops. With the the Gangetic Basin producing 50% of the India's rice and 85% of India's wheat, signifying its importance in the production of the food grains in the country. Then there is shift in the cropping patterns. Because of the reduced groundwater, the farmers may be forced to switch from rice and water to less water intensive crops like millets and pulses, which may not meet the country's food demand. Even though the millets and the pulses, the government is promoting the farmers, the government is incentivizing the farmers to increase the production of the millets and pulses, but shifting a rapid shift from the rice and wheat to this millets and pulses will not meet the country's food demand. Okay, there will be not that much yield that we can get from the millets and pulses. Third is the food inflation and economic stress. The lower production leads to higher food prices and disproportionately affecting the poor and the vulnerable populations. Okay, so the reduced agriculture productivity leads to the higher food prices or the food inflation. Then the food inflation will disproportionately affect the poor and the vulnerable sections of the society, increasing their economic stress, because the rich, they um, they have a very small share of their earnings that they spend on the food. Then there is threat to the green revolution gains. The success of India's green revolution was built on the groundwater fed irrigation, and the depletion risks reversing these gains, increasing dependence on food imports. Then we have land degradation. Excessive groundwater extraction causes soil salinity and alkalinity, further reducing the crop productivity. Now, if we take out more and more of water, the soil in such dry region, the soil becomes dry, it becomes saline, and it becomes alkaline, which reduces the crop productivity further, and this will lead to more food inflation and more economic stress. Then there is increased farmer distress. The crop failures, rising irrigation cost, indebtedness can push farmers out of agriculture, destabilizing the food production systems. Then in conclusion, we summarize first in the first line, we summarize the answer. The serious decline in groundwater potential in the Gangetic Valley poses a direct threat to India's food security by undermining agriculture productivity, destabilizing staple crop supplies, and increasing the food prices. So what is the main impact? That is, it undermines the agriculture productivity, it destabilizes the staple crop supplies and leading to food inflation. Then this is what we can do will be the way forward. The urgent measures such as promoting water efficient irrigation, such as drip irrigation, crop diversification, growing more of less water intensive crops, sustainable groundwater management, and are essential to safeguard the nation's food security and the rural livelihoods. Then moving on to the last question of the day, the question number 15. What are aurora australis and aurora borealis? How are these triggered? A simple, straightforward question from geography asking about important geophysical phenomena. So this is asking about auroras. A 15-mark question that we have to answer in 250 words. Now, in introduction, we describe the auroras with a straightforward question. Then in body, we write in detail about auroras, both the auroras, aurora australis as well as aurora borealis. Then we discuss the factors that trigger the auroras. Then in conclusion, we summarize the answer. Now, aurora australis known as the southern lights, and aurora borealis, that is known as the northern lights, are mesmerizing natural light displays that occur predominantly in Earth's polar regions. Okay, so what are these? These are the natural light displays, and they occur in the Earth's polar region predominantly, but sometimes they are also seen in lower latitudes also. While aurora borealis is visible near the Arctic Circle in countries like Norway, Canada, Russia, aurora australis appear near the Antarctic Circle in the southern hemisphere, notably in Antarctica, southern Australia, and New Zealand. Now, we write about auroras in detail. Auroras are luminous phenomena characterized by dynamic patterns of colored lights. And what are the colors? The green, red, pink, blue, or purple. They appear as curtains, arcs, or spirals in the night sky. And occurrence, they are most commonly seen in high latitude regions around the magnetic poles. So they are observed around the magnetic poles, forming oval shaped zones centered on the poles. So they are centered on poles and are found in high latitudes, but are not limited to the high latitudes, and they are formed around magnetic poles. Then what triggers the auroras? First is the solar wind. The sun emits a constant stream of charged particles, or the plasma, that is electrons and protons, that is known as solar wind. Second is the Earth's magnetosphere interaction. Now most solar wind particles, so solar wind particles like the protons and electrons, they are deflected by Earth's magnetic field. Okay, so we all know that Earth have a magnetic field, and that magnetic field, it repels or it deflects the charged particles like the electrons and protons that are coming along the solar wind. But some of them are trapped and guided towards the polar region. Some of these charged particles, like electrons and protons, they are trapped and they are guided towards, or they go towards the polar region along the magnetic field lines. Third is the atmospheric collision. These particles then enter the upper atmosphere where they collide with oxygen and nitrogen atoms. So these electrons and protons, which are not deflected by the Earth's magnetic field, they enter the atmosphere, they enter the upper atmosphere, and they collide with oxygen and nitrogen atoms, because oxygen and nitrogen are two biggest constituents of our atmosphere. Then there is energy release. Because of this collision, the collisions excite the atmospheric gases, which release energy as visible light when they return to their normal state. Oxygen typically produces green and red lights, and nitrogen yields blue or purple lights. Okay, so all the different colors of light are because of its interaction with different elements. So oxygen, when the charged particles or the plasma particles of the solar wind, they interact with the oxygen, or they collide with the oxygen, they generate green or red lines, and when they impact or they collide with the nitrogen atoms, they yield blue and purple lights. Then there are geomagnetic storms. The enhanced solar activity, such as solar flares and coronal mass ejections, increases the intensity and frequency of auroras, sometimes making them visible at lower latitudes. Then, in conclusion, we summarize the answer. We write about the aurora australis and aurora borealis are spectacular manifestations of the sun-earth connection. So, it is a manifestation, or it is a product of the interaction between the particle of the suns and the Earth's magnetic sphere. And it results from the interaction of solar wind particles with Earth's magnetic field and atmosphere. These natural wonders not only offer breathtaking visual displays, but also provide valuable insights into space weather and planetary magnetism. Okay, so in this way, we have summarized the answer. Now, the PDF of these model answers will be available to you on Shikara Academy's Telegram channel.